Welcome to Business Daily right here on Trust Television. I am Yusuf Akogu. Let's take the business top stories. Glad to have you back. Of course, let's go to the stock market as usual to give you the update as it went down yesterday on the floor of the Nigerian Stock Exchange. It was a recovery day yesterday as the market rebound after that negative trade the previous day trading session to close at 0.08% to do marginal gain. Of course, let's also let you know that the year-to-date gain as of today has moderated to 38.66% as well. Of course, if you look at the volume of trade from what we are having today is very, very low compared to what we had the previous day. It was about 26% or thereabout drop from what we had the previous day. So not much activities on the across various counters. 491.397 we had, and of course in terms of volume, a very low one there. You say 3.22 billion naira, and it deals of about 6,549 exchange hands among investors. Of course, the market cap, the all share index, I beg your pardon, very strong there at 71,066.64 basis points there as well. So move on to see the top gaining equities. Look at them. Mikio, since it got listed about 3 or 4 weeks ago, has remained on the gainer stable. 10% it gained from 2 naira that was listed as the share price. It has grown to 6 naira and 93 kobo. So if you are one of the shareholder, of course, you are actually seeing your money moving. Len Africa, 10% gain recorded to close at 3 naira and 8 kobo. NNFM also closed positive 9.90% to close at 28 naira and 85 kobo per share. Let's look at the top losing equities. The top champion breweries down today 10% there, 3.24%, 3 naira, beg your pardon, the 24 kobo there, the share price there. Oando also closed negative 3.72% to close at 11 naira and 65 kobo. While International Brewery also down 2.17% to close at 4 naira and 50 kobo per shares. Let's look at the activities table and see how the trading were. Unity Bank dominated leading the chart there. 75.4 million volume of shares traded. Universal Insurance Company 61.4 million volume of shares, and of course Mutual Benefit Assurance 46.6 million volume of shares. How is this reflected in the sectorial performance? Let's see the banking sector strong there, 0.46%. The industrial sector is up 0.08%. The consumer goods, the only one that is on the negative side today, 0.04%. Of course, the oil and gas sector is close flat. Of course, the insurance sector, the biggest gainer of the day, 2.13% apparently because of Mutual Benefit Assurance, and of course the Universal Insurance Corporation. Let's look at the rest of Africa and see. GSE in South Africa is down 0.07%. If you go to Ghana, Ghana has remained flat for a very long time. And in Nairobi, Kenya, the market is up 0.79%. These are the highlights of the stock trading across the continent. Now we'll go on a very quick break. When we come back, we'll look at G20 Compact on Africa, and of course another forum that was held last week to discuss African Leaders are Partners Forum that was held in Washington, D.C. in the United States. Don't go away.
We started manufacturing leather since 1958. But the most important thing is that if the system is checked correctly, we won't have where we are now.
If somebody has depression, they may just be very irritable and unproductive in the office. So you find on average already about 1 in 4, 1 in 5 Nigerians already have mental illness, a mental health condition that needs some form of attention.
No matter how good an economy is, if the federal government goes bust, believe me, everything in the economy is just a matter of time it will go bust. So first of all, about maybe slightly above, below 70% is in federal government securities.
If government has banned importation of fertilizer and states are doing it at the level of governance, but I believe that production and distribution of fertilizer should be left to the private sector.
This is the general multi-purpose card, and it has a chip here. So this chip is about 80 kilobytes. The one that you get from the bank for ATM is just 4 kilobytes. So this is like 20 times.
Glad to have you back. It's still Business Daily right here on Trust Television. Now we go into our discussion. We're looking at the G20 Compact going on in Germany. Of course, quite a whole lot of agreements have been signed by Nigeria and so many other African countries attending that conference. Of course, this is a lot of people are saying that Nigeria and the rest of Africa indeed have been attending all of these conferences for many years, and I see the result of some of these meetings have not really been translated to economic gains for Africa. Of course, aside that again, there was also last week an African Leaders and Partners Forum that was held in Washington, D.C. in United States, faraway United States. So we'll be looking at the two events yesterday, and of course, the fallout from those conferences and how it will benefit Africa. I have joining me now Petri Redelinghuys. Petri Redelinghuys is the founder of Herenya Capital Advisor. He joins me virtually from Johannesburg in South Africa. Good morning, Petri.
Good morning, and thank you for sharing with me today.
All right. Our founder and CEO of Emerging Business Intelligence and Innovation, EBII, Adjoa Adjei-Twum, also joins me virtually from Washington, D.C. This morning. Good morning, Adjei.
Good morning. Thank you very much for having me.
All right.
And the name is Adjoa.
It's a pleasure. Let me start with Petri. Petri, so many conferences have been held about Africa. Leaders from this continent have attended all of these conferences for many years. Many, most of the time, looking for investors and all of that. Do you think it's once a summit too many for Africa?
I don't think so. No. I think that Africa is a very exciting investment destination. I mean, we know the facts, right? We have a very young population, fast-growing population. We're home to some of the fastest-growing economies in the world. There's a lot of innovation that comes from Africa. So I think that the opportunity to invest in Africa is one that is very enticing to the Western world, Europe and the US. I mean, China's been investing in a big way in Africa for some time. They've scaled back a little bit now, which is creating a window of opportunity for the Europeans and the US potentially to enter into the African market a bit more aggressively. Everybody's looking for steady, reliable supplies of input material to their production facilities. Germany, for example, is now earmarked to invest 72 billion rand. That works out to around $3.8 billion US in Africa over the next couple of years. And their reasons that they cite for this is essentially that they are looking for reliable supply to their industries. It will create jobs and alleviate poverty within Africa, but it will also benefit them in the sense that they can get, input materials, commodities, resources, that type of thing for the factories that they have on that side. So it's kind of a win-win situation is what everybody's looking at. I think Africa just needs to be quite careful to not be exploited as they sort of have been in the past to some degree.
All right, let me go to Adjoa now. Last week you host a conference on Africa, African Leaders and Partners Forum in the United States with the team Future Africa as a magnet for global investment. Can you talk to us more about that conference?
So thank you very much. So the Africa Leaders and Partners Forum was the inaugural forum that we launched last week. The reason for this forum, it's really to create a solutions summit. So the purpose is to create about 6 solutions summit a year, and it's to solve those critical problems that investors have when they go to Africa to invest. We had invited quite a number of the ambassadors, African ambassadors. We had several of them on the panels and several others in the room, as well as US government officials. So the DFCs, the Prosper Africa was also part of the program, and then other sort of private investors from the banking sector. And it was quite interesting in a sense that the forum is to create that safe environment where the African government who wants investors in their countries, especially those ambassadors in this side of the world, in the US, that are representing their countries, cannot shy away from some of those challenges that these investors are having. And then also, we would then work with them to ensure that the outcomes of these solution summits are then strategically implemented. And that's kind of the promise that we are promising our members who become members, that we will make sure that the outcomes from these the solution summit will then be implemented. So we had parties from the government side, even from the UK government side, all parts of the conference, and in other sectors in the mining sector in Africa was also represented. So it was the inaugural conference last week, and the plan is that over the next couple of years, starting from 2024, we will run a series of these solution summits. Thank you.
Interesting. There's this thing with you, Mr. Adjoa. How can we ensure that Europe, Africa, and of course, indeed, Asia build equal partnership with Africa based on trade and investment rather than development aid and debt?
So I think there are different ways we can do that. One of the ways we can do that is, of course, promoting trade over aid. And that's going to be very key. We have to be very strategic, I would say, as a continent, but organizations like yourselves, the TV stations and the media have to be intentional about promoting trade over aid. I know we see most times on TV, you see more areas of Africa where people are hungry, looking for food and trying to survive. And that's what you tend to see more on a lot of TV programs. So I think there should be an intentional way of promoting trade in Africa over aid. I think that has already started, especially with the enhancements of AGOA and those new announcements, and of course AFCFTA being in place and a few others. But we have to be more intentional about it. There's also the building capacity in local industries, so investment in capacity building to enhance local industries. And this includes not just financial investment, but also knowledge transfer, skills training, and technology. There's also the fair trade practices. Countries have to be very intentional about fair trade practices. They need to work hard to strengthen their controls. Of course, there is AFCFTA, but I believe that each individual country across the continent needs to play a very intentional role. There's also the promotion of regional integration, and so supporting regional economic communities in Africa. Strong regional markets can enhance the negotiation capabilities with larger economies. So these are some of the things that I would say needs to be focused on. as well as, of course, we have the Sustainable Development Goals. That needs to be aligned, with our trade policies. And of course, then that would then make investors globally even feel more and more comfortable being, coming to Africa and seeing Africa as a place where it's more for trade than aid. Thank you.
All right. Let me throw the same question to Petri now. Petri, how do we ensure that Europe indeed see Africa as equal partner?
Well, it's a bit of a challenging situation, right? I mean, historically, I think one of the first summits for the G20 was around sort of 1984, where the topic of discussion was, we've colonized Africa. How do we give it back to them? To the people of Africa, and now they're all meeting in Germany, figuring out, how are they going to do direct investment so that they can continue to benefit from us, right? So I think we need to be having a discussion around how do we beneficiate a lot of the materials that we produce here, so that the people of Africa are the ones that can benefit rather than, exporting the benefit to everyone else. I do quite like the idea of what the other guest is saying here, that we have a sort of a council set up to help countries negotiate. I think what happens a lot of the time is that we get strong-armed, as smaller economies by larger economies, by sort of accepting terms that are not always, completely in our favor. So I think that these types of initiatives would be very helpful in that respect. But I also do think that what we should do as a continent collectively is really to try and focus on ways that we can become, I want to say, almost self-sufficient, right? If we could start to beneficiate a lot of the resources and minerals that we produce here, take steel, for example. We mine an enormous amount of iron ore in South Africa, and we send it all to China, and then we buy the steel back, right? It makes no sense to do that. We should be having discussions around how can we get foreign direct investment potentially to set up smelters and to beneficiate that steel. However, those are investments that these first world countries, if you will, are not really willing to make because it removes the benefit out of the equation for them. So we kind of have to, I want to say, stand on our own 2 feet a little bit. Look, it's great to accept help, and it's great to trade, to accept aid and all that stuff, and it's great to accept help. But at some point, if we want to move to more a trading economy rather than one constantly having to rely on aid, we have to start producing products ourselves. So I think that that's really where the opportunity lies, right? I mean, if you look, for example, I mentioned in my, a little earlier that China is scaling back on the amount of investment they're doing in Africa. They were investing around $1 billion a year for a number of years, and they're scaling back on that, which is creating this window of opportunity for other economies to come and invest here. The reason they're scaling back is because we're unable to pay the debts, right? A lot of these investments are made in the form of, well, we'll build a factory in exchange for, this bond program or whatever. So we've grown debt by something like 186% over the last while, over the last sort of decade, while the economic output hasn't grown nearly that much, right? So we've grown our economy's debts by multiples of what our GDP growth has been. So that is an unsustainable solution. So I think a lot of the discussions happening at the G20 conferences now is around how do we restructure this debt and how do we start making deals that are not necessarily, as poor or as in favor of the first world economies compared to our own.
All right, Petri, you understand that AFCT, Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, AFCFTA, is already in place. Quite a whole lot is being done in that regard. You also agree with me that a prosperous Africa will be a valuable export market for Europe, America, and of course, Asia. So, and indeed, Africa growth, has been stunted for a very, very long time. Are we likely going to see a prosperous Africa in our own generation?
I think so, yes. I think that, we are seeing a lot of economies standing together as, a lot of African countries standing together. And like you mentioned, the sort of free trade agreements on the continent are working. So I think if we continue to focus on those, yes, absolutely. I think we are over the next 50 to 100 years, I think we are really the place to be, the most exciting and growing economy. I think there's a lot of potential here that's just waiting to be unlocked.
All right, let me bring in Mr. Adjoa now into the conversation. Yes, Mr. Adjoa. Mrs. Adjoa, sorry, I beg your pardon. Illicit financial flows is another major issue in Africa. How can this menace be tamed given the experiences that we have had in recent past?
That's a very good question, and it's a battle that everyone is fighting, not just Africa. So it's really a question of the systems and controls in place countrywide. So the governments of those different countries across the continent, how serious they are in curbing this problem. A lot of it would come from the tone from the top, from the regulator side, from the government side. But I would say that a lot of organizations have a lot to do, especially the banking system, because that's really the channel where all finances, or most finances, flow through. It's really the banking system, and I think also the regulator will have to have even more robust controls across the different countries. What we tend to find is in Europe, in the US, the regulators are very harsh when it comes to issuing fines for any, if the bank has weak controls, and a lot of criminals tend to use that particular institution to facilitate criminal activity or to transfer this illicit money. The fines are ridiculously high, in the billions. And so organizations are more, especially those who are somehow have a US nexus, trading with the US dollar currency, or somehow they are more disciplined. But when you tend to look at the African countries, you tend to find that most of the regulators are not as strict when it comes to issuing heavy fines to their banks. Of course, they want to make sure that those banks, they don't cripple the financial sectors in their countries, because the knock-on effect, it's more than just the bank. But I think that's where a lot of the efforts needs to be focused on, is where those regulators needs to be a bit more stricter in enforcing those rules and those regulations that will make sure that the banking sectors and certain companies are taking it much more serious. And of course, there's also the role that technology and AI plays, especially when it comes to strengthening the controls framework in detecting financial crime and investigating financial crime, as well as reporting suspicious activities. But in all, I would say that it's a problem that everybody is fighting. There is no country or no continent that has already fixed this problem. So it's an ongoing issue that we need to continue to innovate constantly, right from the government level to the average business level, in order to fight this problem.
All right, let's talk about the raw material export from Africa. A lot has been taken from Africa, while we indeed in return import the finished good. For instance, the cocoa is taken from Cote d'Ivoire, Nigeria, and even Ghana to Europe to produce chocolate that we import back into Africa. Of course, how can Africa create a market for itself to to develop the value chain of some of these products?
I believe that that's something that has been a great focus, not just even for the AFCFTA, but especially even with my conference last week. That was a major conversation. Ultimately, Africa is looking for funding. That's what it is. We're looking for funding as a continent, and it's those funding and those right partnerships. The conference that we had last week, a lot of the focus on how can we create an environment whereby there will be mutually beneficial partnerships. It's not just an investor coming in, taking the raw materials, paying the people some small peanut, and then turn it into a finished good and bringing it back on the continent. So I think those partnerships is going to be very key. The right partners that will partner and help Africa fund those major sort of operations and factories that will turn a lot of those raw materials into finished product in Africa before they are exported. And I think, the other day we were discussing about even car tires in Ghana. They produce rubber, but they would export those rubber and then import in car tires, which is ridiculously very expensive to manufacture the cars. So I would say that is the partnerships is where a lot of the focus needs to be focused on, and then those funding as well to coming in. Thank you.
All right, let me bring in Petri there. Petri, if we take corruption out of the system we run in Africa, do you think we really need funding from Europe?
I think if we took corruption out of South Africa, we would be way ahead of Europe in almost every way. It's one of the biggest problems that we have here, unfortunately. And I think that this is it's a product of people having been, I want to say, oppressed for a very long period of time, right? Because they've not been, historically, we can argue over the last sort of 4 decades or so, there's been a relative ease in the oppression from the West. But I think if people have been deprived of things for a very long time, when given the opportunity to finally get those things, they'd be willing to do whatever it takes to get them. And I think that's one of the primary drivers behind why we're seeing so many government officials that are corrupt. And, I think that South Africa stands probably as the best example of that, right? This might not make me very popular, but the corruption that we have, at least within the borders of South Africa, is staggering. And I think that if that was out of the picture, if we actually had a government that didn't embezzle funds and didn't, it wasn't corrupt, we would have an enormous amount of prosperity here. So yes, I think that is a big issue, and this is, to your other guest's point, this is where financial control is extremely important, because we've seen how destructive that can be. I mean, even if you look at just our power utility, Eskom, for example, there's sabotage, there's embezzlement, there's an enormous amount of corruption that's taken place that's gotten us to where we are today. So I think if you had removed that, for example, over the last 20 years, and we had, thriving, stable electricity supply, our entire economy would look very different today, right? So I think that, yes, if we could remove corruption from the equation somehow, we would move forward a lot faster.
All right, Petri, let me give Mrs. Adjoa 30 seconds there to respond to this question. Mrs. Adjoa, what are the challenges you think investors face when they want to invest, especially in raw materials in Africa?
So one of the biggest challenges I've come across, especially dealing with investors, is access to the right channels in the right way. And sometimes you'd have to know the right people to be able to have a smoother process in accessing these resources. And if you didn't, then it might be a long, frustrating experience. That's one of the challenges that they have. Of course, they also have... It's 30 seconds, right? So
Absolutely.
That's one of the major challenges.
Absolutely.
It's really the access to the right people at the right time, especially in African countries, most times the governments are heavily involved. If you want to do any form of investment, you have to. The government are involved somehow, and having access to the right, the minister or whatever it is. Properly.
All right. I must thank you, Mrs. Adjoa Adjei-Twum, founder, of course, CEO of EBII Group. I must thank you for your time all the way from Washington, D.C. in the United States. And of course, Petri Redelinghuys, founder of Herenya Capital Advisors. I must thank you too for your time on Business Daily. All right, with that is a wrap on this show today. We'll be back again tomorrow. I am Yusuf Akogun.